So I enjoyed that immensely.
Thank you.
Great, and I have a couple follow-up questions for you.
Uh-oh.
Just a few.
All right.
So, and let's just start off with the average customer. So you're developing this, it's fair to say, a more customer-centric model. Mm-hmm. But for the average customer, doesn't monitor their energy usage that closely, doesn't have a Nest thermostat. How are these changes you're talking about going to affect that person?
Well, first of all, that's a great question because we're really engaged in it, but there's a lot of people that just, don't want to think about it. And to me, that says that we're doing our job right. Because I tell you when they do think about it, when the lights are out or when they're paying their bill and they're complaining about their bill. So let's make sure that people that don't want to think about it, it can be happy. That's the table stakes. That's the reliability. That's the safety. And we will do the cleaner and cleaner energy. And if we can keep the price affordable, everybody's happy. So I think that's where we are with that.
But now let's go to the customer that does care and does monitor.
Yep.
And sustainability is important. Being green is important. Having a Nest thermostat is important. How is this change going to affect that customer? What kind of information are they going to be getting that is going to affect their behavior, which is a lot of what they really are asking for? I want to be more efficient. I want to be a better, smarter user of energy.
Well, I think those are the customers that we do need to innovate and give them the products, the information, and the alternatives so that they want to remain with Xcel Energy. It's early days for us, and we have to change some things culturally inside of Xcel Energy. We have to have the flexibility to move a little bit quicker with those products. In some cases, I think we're going to have to change rate design, but I think we've got a lot to offer, and I hope that, as I said in my prepared remarks, in 2030, a lot of the customers that are on our grid today remain on our grid and remain served by Xcel Energy. And I think if we do our jobs and we get help in these collaborative efforts, we'll be successful with that.
So 2030, 15 years, do you think that people are going to be able to see real time their energy usage?
Well, I think you can already see that in some cases, but it's
sort of like on a mass basis, though.
Yeah. It gets back to this, moving at the speed of value. There's technologies that can do that today, and I think our job is going to be to make sure that as the grid modernizes, you have that capability as well.
So as you get the different sources, potential sources for capital, like Yield Co, and there's been the master limited partnerships have been around. How does this affect, it's different ways of attracting capital, but does it also become more volatile capital? A different investor starts looking at the utility business?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. First of all, let me just tell you, I'm not advocating that we run out and,
right, but it's something that you're looking into.
But we need to be open to it, because the fact of the matter is we're going to spend $14.5 billion over the next 5 years. Low-cost debt helps tremendously. It really has. But we also have to finance that with equity. We have investors, we have shareholders, and they're pretty demanding. Capital's always been competitive. And I enjoy talking to the investors. I enjoy talking to them about the things I talked to this group here tonight. We're going to go greener. We're going to have less carbon on our system. And they're interested in it, but it comes down to making sure that there's alignment with the regulatory compact, because they lose their greenness when it's not going to be green in terms of money for them.
Right.
It can be frustrating at times, but it's true, Chris.
Yeah. So, and if you think about the capital market, it's global.
Yeah.
And you're living within as you said, a regulatory compact. So how is the investment community responding?
Yeah. Well, with low interest rates, all utility stocks have risen. The sea's rising. We haven't risen as much, and in fact, because I think they are concerned about some of the outcomes that we've had. I'm optimistic we can change that. I think we're on the right path. Conversations like this, I think, get us on the right path. But we have global investors. Your Midwest utility has global investors. In fact, about 10% of our shares are owned overseas. So we are a global company as well. And it is interesting. You go to Europe, they are far more interested in talking about some of the environmental aspects than perhaps U.S. investors are.
So one thing that really struck me is, and I've seen this chart, but it was powerful, just how much the price of solar has just dropped. And as you say, I think 10 years ago, very few people would have even come close to what is happening. So how is this price drop in solar, is that starting to change the way you're thinking about your strategic planning with the role of solar?
Absolutely. Solar is mainstream. We're going to add a tremendous amount of wind and solar in the next 15 years, just right here in Minnesota. And I can tell you also in Colorado and Texas, New Mexico. I mean, it's coming close, if not exceeding parity before the environmental benefits on some gas alternatives. Now, as you get more and more renewables on your system, the integration cost starts to rise.
Right.
And we need to be thinking about that. We need to be thinking about reliability. We need to keep the lights on. But I'm really excited about it. And I got to tell you, I would have never thought that 5 years ago.
So 2050, no fossil?
Well, let's let things move at the speed of value. I think it would be difficult to keep prices affordable and be completely renewable. I think it will be difficult if we don't have a nuclear fleet. And I guess what I again am focused on is let's decarbonize the fleet in the most efficient way possible.
Right.
And let's not be biased towards anything. Let's keep as many options open for as long as you can. Obviously, you have to close them out at some point, but keep moving ahead.
So as an outsider to the industry, I mean, one of the things that fascinates me is now the price of oil is so far down. The price of natural gas is down. And now there's a whole conversation going on. Is $50 the ceiling, not the floor when we're thinking about the price of oil? So how does, going through the turbulence that we're going through right now, how does that affect the way you think about renewables and sustainability and the whole movement?
Yeah, well, the cure for high prices is high prices. And, that's the same with low prices. And so that's what I just think it's really important that we don't just move to natural gas, or we just don't move here. Fuel diversity is a good thing. It's good for the economic ups and downs on specific commodities. It's a good thing for reliability. We have been using wind, as I mentioned in my remarks, as really an economic hedge because we're way ahead of the standards here in Minnesota on how much we had to bring on the milestones. But it's been so compelling economically that we've just said, let's bring it on because it's cheaper. I still have to have the gas plant, okay?
Right.
But if I don't need to actually use it, it's just there for backup. And I have the option to either hedge gas on a 10-year strip, or I can build a wind plant or buy a wind plant from a developer. And if that is cheaper on a levelized basis, we all win. And
Yeah.
that's wind, I guess you could say.
Oh, that's bad. Okay, but all right, you get to say that.
I'll keep my day job.
So you'd mentioned, if I right, so on the conservation side, the equivalent of 8 power plants, or not having to construct 8 power plants. So when you mentioned your $14.5 billion that you need to be spent capital expenses, how much can conservation, how does the role of conservation play in thinking about these longer-term capital expenditures?
Oh, I think it's already played a huge role, as you just mentioned. I think it will continue to play a huge role. And you talked about some of the ways that it will earlier when you asked me about, when people that are engaged, they want to see more information about their energy usage. Appliances are getting so much more efficient. I think we're in the early days of conservation, frankly.
So with the customer, more customer-centric, do you see that there's going to be time, when I go to the Apple store, there's a Genius Bar, and they're not referring to me, that's for sure. It's the people that are working the Genius Bar. Is there going to be the XL Genius Bar, or that kind of thing, as part of as you reach out to the customer?
I mean, I have all the respect in the world for Apple and Google, and we've got a long way to go to replace that genius. But what I want to do is make sure that we're keeping with the times. Internally, we're transforming to a more customer-centric, a more competitive culture. There's a lot we have been doing and will continue to do to improve the customer experience. It gets back to giving them the choices they want. it gets back to being more flexible. These are not easy things for a utility that's been regulated in the past to change to, but we're changing half of our workforce out in the next 10 years through retirement. So that's a big challenge for information, but it's also an opportunity to kind of start to introduce some of that mindset, and we're working on it.
So as you're making these adjustments and you're talking to the regulators and talking about a more flexible regulatory framework, I mean, what would you like to, what would you like to see first? I mean, what would you like to see reflected in this more flexible regulatory framework?
Well, the opportunity to collaborate, to discuss, it's designed where we file rate cases and then we don't talk to each other except through legal type proceedings, and that makes it hard to move the chain. It's important to us, and everybody has their job to do, and they do it well, and it's very time consuming. I'd like to get a more simplified regulatory compact so we can do more collaboration on the choices that we ought to be making and the things we ought to be doing to drive that carbon reduction at an affordable price going forward. So I mentioned some of those things, longer term compacts, more incentive type mechanisms. We're confident we can keep costs down, and you put all that together. If we can change the way we have been doing things and free up time to have those dialogues, I think we'd all benefit from it.
Okay, so let's go to, say it's 2015, so we'll go to 2020. Mm-hmm. And so what are some of the markers you're going to be looking for in terms of your overall presentation that you're succeeding, that you're actually moving toward a more customer-centric model, that you're getting a more flexible regulatory structure? I mean, I know you want to reduce the carbon, but what are your markers of success that we should all be watching?
Well, we're measuring them today. I mean, we measure customer satisfaction, but we want to take that to the next level. Are customers leaving because we didn't have the product that they wanted? And if so, why is that? So one of our goals is to make sure that we can offer customers the products that they want and do it in a way that's fair to all customers. And again, as I mentioned in my remarks, that is a big challenge because, I mean, we have to be fair to everyone, and that requires some pretty detailed rate work. And it's a lot easier said than done, trust me. But that's one of the markers that I'll look for. Are we able to meet changing customer needs and expectations? Are we giving the customers that want it the information they want? Are we reducing carbon as we said we were? Are we keeping prices affordable and competitive? Does the table stakes, reliability, safety, is that still there? Has that not eroded? Those are the things we measure ourselves against today, and we'll expand that and measure ourselves into the future.
And you mentioned, I mean, when it thinks about cybersecurity, a lot of that has been revolving around for national security reasons. But as some of the examples that you put up there, the more and more you interact with customers and have a more customer-centric, and they want more information and they want to be able to interact, the more you can think Target, the more vulnerable you become as you go to embrace your customer.
Exactly. As we optimize the grid, as we allow two-way communications, that's all generally internet-based, and we all know that the internet's a great thing, but it has its risk too, and so we have to be very mindful of that. One of the things that I'll tell you that we're going to want to make sure that we retain is some sort of analog system, so that in a worst-case scenario, we could do some things manually. We talked a little bit about microgrids. See, I think this is where microgrids might play a role too. We as a society need electricity.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be too long without it where society would fall apart. So we need to take that very seriously.
And are you surprised at the increase in demand electricity? Because you said like your appliances aren't using as much. I mean, they're much more efficient. Your smartphone doesn't use that much. But then you have all this demand from this digital ecosystem that is evolving and growing, and all the automated trading that's going on. I mean, electricity is everywhere, and all this that we talk about.
Well, what we want here in Minnesota, by the way, is to get the data centers that power all of that. I mean, because we have natural advantages in Minnesota with our cold weather, and we actually do. So. I don't know if that was your question.
No, but I mean, it's like they're up in Finland, and
well, they're here in the United States too. Yeah. So I mean, we'd like to have them here in Minnesota. There is a lot of technology, but I mean, the fact is that sales growth isn't going to be as predictable as it was before. Things like the electrification of the transport industry, I think that's very exciting. It's very interesting.
Yep.
If everybody in Minnesota had an electric car tomorrow, it probably would increase our sales by about 15%. So that kind of puts it in context. That's not going to happen, obviously.
Right.
So,
yeah. Okay. And so so you have a regulatory structure. And tell me if I'm wrong about this. It seems that the way that the utility industry and its regulatory industry evolved was to eliminate as much uncertainty as possible, right? So you would be able to deliver electricity. People kind of know what's happening on the rate side, what the price is going to be. And now what is happening is whatever the best intentions are to eliminate uncertainty is simply becoming a much bigger part of your business.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say we've always had some uncertainty. That's why we need to get a return that reflects some risk.
But when I started covering on Wall Street, utilities were for widows and orphans. You always get that dividend check. It was safe.
And we want to keep that dividend safe and secure. We want to continue to have investors. It's a changing world. It really is. And again, if we don't want to be AT&T and see a big part of our business fall away. We're going to, as I mentioned, we're going to have to change. We're going to have to be flexible. We're going to have to be cost-driven. We're going to have to be efficient. We're going to have to listen better. We're going to have to communicate better. And then we're going to have to collaborate more. And we're going to have to hopefully do it with the help of the people in this room.
And then, of course, we're associated with Minnesota. We're tied here in Minnesota, but you're in other states.
Yep.
And so how much collaboration is there going on among the states that you're working in? Not just you working with your different divisions, but among the regulators. And how important is that?
Yeah, it's really important. We serve through one system: Wisconsin, obviously Minnesota, North and South Dakota. That's one system. Then we serve Colorado and New Mexico and Texas, but those are separate systems. So we have strength in numbers. We get to spread those costs over a bigger footprint. But to your point, we have some very different philosophies on energy policy in our states. North Dakota, Minnesota, very different. But we both need each other.
Right.
So what we need to do is come up with ways that accommodate both, and so that both parties are happy. Because splitting them up is probably the worst alternative.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Well,
I really have enjoyed this. It's
appreciate
been a lot
it, Chris.
of fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Fantastic. Thank you so much to you both, and thank you for a great overview and great conversation. We're going to transition now into the panel portion of the evening. So we've got reaction from 4 policy experts who work here in Minnesota, and I'll ask them to come up to the stage as I introduce them. So first up will be Mike Bull. Mike is my colleague at CEE. He's our Director of Policy and Communications. You've got longer bios in the program, so I'll spare you the 45 minutes it would take me to go through Mike's previous positions. And probably, as some of you may know, the most enthusiastic Tesla owner in the room. So see if you can get a ride. Next up, I'll invite Bill Grant to the stage, and Bill's... Bill is the Deputy Commissioner of Energy and Telecommunications at the Minnesota Department of Commerce. He's been working on energy policy in Minnesota for a number of years, including was the Associate Executive Director of the Isaac Walton League for 16 years. And Bill is one of my go-to people for old Sheldon Strom stories, so thank you for that. And finally, I'll invite Public Utilities Commissioner Dan Lipschultz up to join us. And Dan was appointed to the PUC in 2014 on Valentine's Day, as I just learned. It's almost a year. And he serves on the Utilities Commission. He was most recently before that an attorney at Moss and Barnett and has worked in the state on numerous telecom issues. I've also learned he is a long-suffering Minnesota Timberwolves fan, so I'm sorry about that, Dan. Thank you so much, and Chris, take it away.
All right. Well, hi, everyone. And yes, I am a roller coaster fanatic. My favorite roller coaster is out in Sandusky, Ohio. Can everybody hear me if I hold the mic here? It's called the Top Thrill Dragster. It's 420 feet straight down vertical drop, and you get shot out at the beginning, 0 to 120 miles an hour in like 3.8 seconds. It's not quite as fast as taking a ride with Chair Garofalo, but it's pretty good. So you guys, thank you all for coming, and Chris and Ben, that was fantastic. We really appreciate you guys coming here tonight. So in reaction to Ben's presentation, I wanted to talk a little bit about our regulatory innovation initiative. But before I get there, I want to talk about our I'll give you an overview a little bit of CEE. I think you all have a connection to some aspect of CEE, but I know I didn't really understand the full scope of what we did before I got here back in April of 2013. So I want to take a quick moment. It starts for us with research. We've got a group of PhDs and research engineers that are really doing some nation-leading technical research, kind of unmatched outside of the national energy labs. They're doing building science work, HVAC systems, indoor air quality. Really is a hidden gem here in the upper Midwest that I didn't know about before I came. That technical understanding is incorporated into our energy efficiency programs that we run for a number of the utilities, Xcel Energy, CenterPoint, Minnesota Energy Resources, and others. Some of that work, 3 of our programs last year won national awards, so we get national recognition for the innovation that we incorporate into those programs. Xcel's Minnesota small business customers will save over $400 million due to the energy efficiency work we've done to date, working with them and with the small business customers. So it's a really tremendous benefit. We also provide low-cost financing, which, again, another thing I did not know. We've provided almost $200 million over the years for energy efficiency installations and building retrofits, which really helps make a lot of these transactions go where they otherwise might not. And finally, all of this learning and this boots-on-the-ground technical research and technical understanding gets translated into the policy work that we work on up at the Capitol and at our regulatory agencies. So, you know, Ben talked a lot about customers, and that's where we start too. We do energy efficiency work because of the customer benefits of energy efficiency. It empowers customers to control costs, reducing costs for all customers, including the environmental costs and the health costs associated with environmental emissions. And it also taken the energy waste out of an economy, frees those dollars up to be used for other purposes, increasing the vitality of the local economy, something that we all think is good. So that focus on customers, you know, in our long-time work with communities, we've seen what Ben was talking about, that customer expectations, community expectations of their utilities are increasing. And that's coming at a time, you know, and that's across a host of dimensions: price, engagement, cleanliness of the fuel sources. It's a whole host of things. And at the same time that's happening, the cost and performance of alternatives, as Ben mentioned, is rapidly improving. Some of them, like solar, is super rapidly improving. So these so-called disruptive technologies I've listed here, and there are others, are placing an increasing amount of strain on utilities in the way they recover their costs and they make investments. And the issue is that the deployment of these technologies varies by technology, and not every utility is under the same amount of stress and pressure as any other, but the deployment of these so-called disruptive technologies can't be held back for long by defensive rate making or other means, and because customers will want access to the benefits that these technologies provide. So the regulatory system will need to respond. If you flip there for me. So we started the Regulatory Innovation Initiative a couple of years ago to work with customers, communities, utilities, and regulators to help them adapt to these increasingly difficult dynamics. A lot of this work started with the Minneapolis project. We worked on the Minneapolis Energy Pathway Study for City of Minneapolis back in 2013, 2014. I know there are a number of people here in the room that were engaged with us on that project. If you remember that work started in the context of the city evaluating whether or not they wanted to take over the utility infrastructure in the city and provide those services themselves. And it ended with a first-in-the-nation city utility partnership where XL, CenterPoint, and the city are all working now together in concert toward meeting shared goals. And I think that's a tremendous outcome for all of us and a good model going forward. And Ben showed quite a bit of leadership during that process, and thank you for that. So another project that we're working on, which Ben mentioned also, is called the E21 Initiative. It's under this umbrella of regulatory innovation with XL, Minnesota Power, my good friend Rolf Nordstrom from the Great Plains Institute and his staff. We're all working together in a collaborative process with a number of stakeholders that, residential customers, large industrial customers, business community, environmental groups, other utilities, regulatory staff, public entities. It's a broad group of stakeholders, and we came together around a consensus set of recommendations that will move the regulatory system to where it can support more choices for customers and put in place a performance-based regulatory system that will allow utilities to earn a portion of their revenue for meeting specified important public policy outcomes like customer service, affordable rates, environmental improvement, reliability, and the like. So what we're talking about today is in this meeting and over the course of this Regulatory Innovation Initiative is that it's substantial. What we're talking about, the shift that we're talking about is substantial because utilities are such an integral part of our lives and businesses, and they've done such a tremendous job over the decades under the current regulatory framework to provide the services that we've all needed. But as we've mentioned, and as Ben mentioned in his talk, that regulatory framework is under significant stress, and we need, as a group, to work together to identify pilot the technologies and the mechanisms where we can fail forward and find the ways to continue to advance the public interest as we move into this next phase. So that's what the Regulatory Innovation Initiative is all about, and that's what I think Ben has been working on, and I know a number of utilities are also working on that as well. I should have mentioned, because they drove all the way down here, folks from Otter Tail are heavily engaged in this kind of activity as well, as is Minnesota Power, Great River Energy, Southern Municipal Power Agency. This is important to all of us, all customers and all the environmental organizations and business community, but the utilities are all paying very close attention and trying to figure out the path forward that works for them, and that's something I think we'll all want to work on. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the conversation.
Well, good evening, everyone. And I guess the first thing I learned is I didn't know I get to call the CEO of Excel by his first name. So that was the first thing I learned from Mike. So, well, good evening. It's great to be here. And it is a fascinating time to be involved in energy policy, specifically in Minnesota and in America. And I'd like to highlight just 3 things that I'm sure you're all aware of, but it's worth mentioning. Number 1 is that renewables are getting more affordable. We take a look at solar, take a look at wind, the cost curves are undisputable, they're going down in price. Second of all is the area of energy efficiency. And we're seeing massive transformations and massive breakthroughs in the area of efficiency. Something as simple as an incandescent light bulb compared to an LED light bulb. We're able to offer consumers 90% more efficient usage, but at the same time a longer lasting bulb instead of the incandescents. And then third and finally, is the issue of the breakthrough, the shale gas revolution, the fracking revolution that's taking place, which is really transforming the world in terms of energy policy and development. And if that's not good enough for you, you know, you got this issue of electrification of automobiles, you know, having electric vehicles move to the grid, which I kind of like a little bit, you know, but I won't talk about my Tesla, that's all right. But I will if you ask me, so it's all right. But so you have these things going on, and it's massive transformation to the system, but think about the positive impact this is going to have on society and what we can offer. In the past, we were given a choice. You could have cleaner, or you could have cheaper. And really the trade-off is that if you wanted cleaner energy, you had to pay a lot more. And likewise, if you were interested in affordability, you were stuck with more pollution. Well, the reality is technology has moved us forward, and that is no longer the case. Today, in the 21st century, we can offer consumers, and as public policymakers, we have the opportunity to have energy that is both cleaner and more affordable. And that's a choice that I think Minnesotans like. I think ratepayers like that. Very, very rarely in public policy do we have decisions without trade-offs. You know, usually there's competing visions or competing public policy goals. But now in the area of energy, we don't have those issues. So what are the barriers? What are the problems? The first one is citizen knowledge and engagement. A recent poll that I read online said that 20% of Americans believe that the electricity generated for their light bulb comes from the light switch. Now, I don't know whether to laugh or to cry when I hear that. But it shows you that, you know, concepts such as net metering and distributed generation and understanding the cycling of power and different rate bases, the public is technically illiterate on these issues. And as public policymakers and as thought leaders, we have a responsibility to make sure to educate the public so that they understand the facts. Yesterday, we had a hearing in the Job Growth, Energy Affordability Policy and Finance Committee. We dedicated it, yeah, say that fast. We had a hearing just dedicated on the issue of wind, just wind energy alone, and offering the positives and the negatives of wind energy. And even there, it's a difficult conversation to have with people who are supposed to be policy experts, explaining how wind, its integration with Xcel Energy in southwestern Minnesota has clearly saved money. It's been a good public policy choice. But in other areas of the state, why they've had to leave Minnesota for their wind generation because of the higher capacity factors of North Dakota, or because of a lack of load and a lack of transmission. We end up with negative pricing overnight or high wind curtailments. And so understanding the trade-offs of these policies are extremely complex for policymakers, and forget about citizens. So also, when you take a look at the area of energy efficiency, the reality is a lot of our regulatory schemes were set up for an ever-expanding and growing rate base. And that's just not going to happen anymore. Now, this is good, but we have to respond to it. And third and finally, in the area of natural gas, we're seeing right next door in North Dakota, this is a great opportunity for Minnesota. But as we decide to become energy independent and as we utilize these resources, we have to understand that we need to create energy infrastructure right here in Minnesota. That infrastructure that we're no longer using in Saudi Arabia or other parts of the world, we're being independent, but we have to have that created here in Minnesota. You know, last year I had an interesting thing happen to me. I figured out that I am now closer to 60 years of age than I am to 25. Yeah. And so two thoughts entered my mind when that happened. The first thing was, wow, this sucks. But the second thing is you start thinking about, okay, what are people going to think about me? You know, what are people going to envision me doing? You know, in the future when people are talking about me, what are they going to think about the things that I did? And it gives you a little longer term vision about where things are at. And so I like to think that maybe I've grown up a little bit with my new responsibility, and maybe I have a little bit more of a serious tone. But I do think when you take a look at energy policy, it is so important to Minnesotans. And it's so important that we return Minnesota to the solutions we've had in the past where it was always bipartisan and always collaborative. You look at the renewable energy standard that passed back in 2007. 90% of the Minnesota legislature voted for that bill. 90%. It was passed. Yep. And it's not something that affects just one political party or the other, but when you have one party in total control, you're unavoidably going to exclude some stakeholders from the process. And we see that when my party takes control of Washington or Wisconsin, or you see out here in Minnesota. But what I'm hoping we can do is have a more longer-lasting vision so that we have agreement on these policies and we have that 90% consensus on things that we're moving forward on. Going forward, I think there's an ambitious energy agenda. I think it's the sleeper issue of the legislative session, primarily driven by the fact that technology is making these policy choices a lot easier for public policymakers. Just like email saved a lot of trees and telecommuting has reduced a lot of emissions, we're seeing now these breakthroughs in electrification of vehicles. And my latest, this is the second time I've done this tour. Annie Levinson-Fowke, raise your hand. Okay, there you are, right there, good. She's the executive director of the Legislative Energy Commission, and last summer she kind of got me interested in this issue of automated driving and autonomous driving. And so if you check your Twitter feeds, I tweeted out a video before I came up here of the Mercedes S-Class. It's from 2013. It's not even the latest technology, where you see a vehicle driving down the road, a driver sitting in a seat, the vehicle is switching lanes on its own, it's controlling the acceleration and the braking. And the impact that autonomous driving can have on our energy sector and on transportation, it's pretty cool. It's pretty neat. So I'm honored to be here today. I'm looking forward to participating in the panel. Thank you very much for the invitation and looking forward to a good discussion. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks very much, and I wanted to start by adding my congratulations to Center for Energy and Environment. I've had the chance to work with the Center really throughout my career, starting when I was with the Department of Public Service back in the day, then my years in advocacy, and now again at the Department of Commerce, where we've done a lot of close work, not only on the policy front, but on the research front with CEE. Now, admittedly, some of this work has occurred on the golf course for those of you who know about all that, but important work there too. So wanted to start by doing that. Secondly, I wanted to acknowledge that there's a number of department staff here in the audience this evening. And if you haven't had a chance to meet some of them, you really should. I've never had the chance to work with a more dedicated and committed group of people, and it defies every stereotype that you have about state employees or bureaucrats in general. They really do a fabulous job for the state of Minnesota. Now, I should have thought about the logistics of trying to hold these notes and a handheld mic at the same time, but I didn't, so bear with me a little bit. I wanted to talk for just a couple of minutes about why I think we're here, and that is that in many respects, the current utility business model is not working for us terribly well, and we really need to think about how we can change it. Some of the things that are characteristic of the current model, first of all, and we're not going to change this aspect, but it's a high capital cost industry with long-lived assets. And that imposes certain constraints on how quickly the industry can move and how quickly it can adopt new technologies. Secondly, investments by utilities are typically recovered through volumetric sales. And thank God for that, because it's really been the growth of the industry and constant sales growth in the industry that has allowed the industry to be developed as probably the technical marvel of the known world, the electric grid as we know it. Had it not been for continuing growth in customer usage, the revenue would not have been there to make those investments. But now, as Ben and other speakers have noted, those circumstances have changed. For both utilities and regulators, there's a difficult balancing act that we have always had to perform, but it's getting more difficult as we go along, and that is we need to balance the three goals of reliability, affordability of services, and environmental performance. And I firmly believe that we can have all three simultaneously, but it takes a lot of thought and a lot of planning. And finally, all of this leads to what I think is the main threat to the current business model, and that is long-term revenue erosion within the industry. And a number of the factors that have already been mentioned by Ben and others are really driving that phenomenon. And the reason why I think we're forced to look at new approaches, some of the challenges, and these are good things. Energy efficiency has been successful beyond, I think, most people's initial expectations. And the opportunities for growth in the energy efficiency realm, I think, continue to be there and will be for the foreseeable future. We've mentioned the falling costs of renewables. Really, the falling costs of customer-sided generation generally is a major factor driving a need for change in the industry. And because of those two factors, sales growth is no longer covering the fixed costs of maintaining the grid. And this isn't just a problem for a few people. This is a problem for all customers, and we need a solution that supports all customers. We have policies and will continue to support policies that have the state relying more and more on energy efficiency and renewable sources. Again, that's a good thing. It also potentially contributes to that revenue erosion problem. We have ongoing costs associated with just maintaining what we have. Like the debate the state is about to have about the transportation infrastructure, we have similar issues in the electric infrastructure. Now, utilities in this state have done a superlative job of reinvesting in the grid. The CapEx 2020 projects were mentioned before. Things like that really put us ahead of the curve relative to other states and regions of the country. But that isn't a one-time investment. That's an ongoing investment, and one that we need to maintain. And finally, federal policy is going to be a significant contributor to the challenges we face in the revenue erosion issues. We've talked about the Clean Power Act. Again, a good thing, certainly from our perspective, but it is going to put increased pressure on a change to alternative sources, some of which are going to be customer-sided, and we need a solution. I mentioned that I was with the predecessor agency to the Department of Commerce when the Energy Division was with the Department of Public Service. And as a young analyst and policy person there, one of my jobs was to look at the plans that utilities had for meeting customer load growth over the coming years. This was before we did integrated resource plans, but we did receive regular data from utilities about where things were, and that was at a time, early 80s, when customer sales growth was somewhere in the neighborhood of 7% per year. Compare that to about 0.5% sales growth that we're currently seeing. And just to pick on Xcel, their plans called for the construction of the Sherco 3 generating station, of course, in the mid-80s, which is a project that was completed, and a project of similar size needed every 3 to 4 years after that for the foreseeable future. Can you imagine? We built Sherco 3 and haven't had a proposal for a new coal plant or any facility of that size since. But that gives you some idea of how things have changed in the industry. I won't remake the point about the falling costs of renewables, solar in particular. I do want to mention, because Ben did bring this up, that integration costs are going to be an important part of how we look at the industry and how we incorporate renewables into our system. And we've just recently completed a study looking at integration costs for a higher level of penetration of renewables. What we found, in essence, was that this is doable at a reasonable cost. Again, it's going to take a lot of us working together to make sure that that all can happen. So with that, I'll close, and thank you very much.
Thanks. Those lights are blinding. I have this whole stage to myself, and it's a really nice surface, and I have smooth shoes on, and I can't moonwalk, and that's unfortunate. Or maybe I can. I might try it. No, you're not going to see it. Sorry. I can't see who that was, but I think I know. I thought I'd been here once before, and it turns out I was a long, long time ago, but I was getting nervous. I don't get around much, and so I wasn't sure I knew where this was. So I looked up directions on the internet, and it's 35 East South, and you just take the 94 West, Marion Street exit, you go left at Marion, and you go through the light at John Ireland Boulevard. And I sort of take directions very literally, and I'm just thankful the light was green when I got there. When you're standing up here like this, you feel you have to tell jokes. I don't really have a presentation. And you're happy about that from the applause. The topic here is the future of energy regulation in Minnesota. And so that poses a question. When you're a lawyer, it always poses an issue or a question. The question is, what do we want, or what do we expect energy regulation in Minnesota to look like in the future? What do we want? What do we expect? And I don't have any answers, but what I've been trying to do, since we're early in that process, is to frame my analysis of that question. And I think, as I look at it, there are really three overarching questions that need to be asked. And I think the first question, I'm going to start with some audience participation. And I'm going to ask you, with a show of hands, how many of you in your homes get cable television or broadband internet service from your local cable provider? Raise your hand if you do. Keep your hand up if and only if you would like that cable provider to provide your electric utility service. I think we have the answer to that first question, because the first question in my mind is, what don't we want? What don't we want energy regulation to look like in the future? And I have some slides that provide some more objective data to support what I think we all just saw here through a show of hands. You're looking here at the American Customer Satisfaction Index. It was developed in 1994 by the University of Michigan. It's widely used and highly regarded by industries across the country, and it measures customer satisfaction through an econometric model using survey data across every industry in the United States. And you'll see here the cable television industry and the internet broadband industry. And I can tell you right now that those ratings on a 100-point scale are the worst of any industry in the country. And you'll see some familiar names that actually fall below the average, which is an average worst in the country among industries. And I think that's instructive. And I think it tells us what we don't want. And what don't we want? What those numbers really reflect, it seems to me, is an industry that is comprised of several large firms with considerable market power, but with no meaningful regulation. And I don't think that I hear anyone talking about going there in the electric energy industry, but I don't think anyone was talking about that back at the dawn of the telecommunications revolution back when I was starting at the Commission, and we essentially transformed the way we regulate telecommunications and communications. We talked then, as we do now, about all of these technological advances, about the advent of competition, and from all of that grew what you see here in these numbers. And I think that's a cautionary tale, and that's why my first question is, what don't we want? And here's a comparison to other industries, by the way. But I think my second question then is, what do we have now in the electric utility industry? Well, let's take a look at what we have using the same ACSI data. And this is pretty interesting. The industry average for investor-owned electric utilities, and by the way, cooperatives are even better, 75, which is right in line with some of the better industries that have very relatively high customer service satisfaction. And you look at Xcel Energy, they're right here too. And what you can see in these notes is that the industry in general, and Xcel Energy in particular, have been sort of going up, not down in customer satisfaction as measured by the ACSI. Over the last 10 years, last year was Xcel Energy's highest mark, and this year was a close second. So even with prices going up, it's interesting. And with all these challenges that we're talking about and all these trends, with all of that, customer satisfaction in the electric industry, electric utility industry, is high relative to other industries, and it's been going up. And I think that's a tale that's important to keep in mind as we move ahead and consider changes. There are things we have today that are going well. And when we're talking about a more customer-centric model, this tells me that things are going fairly well from a customer-centric perspective, and we want to be careful not to lose what we have as we move ahead to try to get something different that might address some of these trends and issues that we're facing today. And I guess then the final question is, well, why change? Well, I think the trends in place tell us we need to make some changes. The real question, and the tough ones, are going to be what changes and over what time frame, and how are we going to make them? And I'm not going to go through all of this. I think we're going to have a discussion, and you've heard a lot of it already. But as I think about what changes we ought to consider making, I have three questions that come, at least into my mind. And one is, what are we trying to achieve? And by we, what are stakeholders, environmental groups, consumer groups, what are utilities trying to achieve? Secondly, what is it in the way we regulate today that prevents utilities and other stakeholders from achieving those ends? And I thought I had three questions. I think I have two. But I think those are the two questions that I'm going to be asking as we go ahead. What is it we want to achieve in very concrete, specific terms? And what is it about the way we go about regulating today that prevents or stifles utilities and others from actually achieving those ends? And I'll end there, and maybe we can have a discussion about some of that. No moonwalk, I'm done.